This is also a time of change for my family. I count on the loving help of my darling wife, Camilla. In recognition of her own loyal public service since our marriage 17 years ago.
The doors had already closed before anyone realized Princess Anne had refused to leave the room. Around the polished table, senior advisors exchanged uneasy glances, while confidential folders remained unopened. No one raised a voice. No one dared. According to persistent royal speculation that has circulated in recent years, this was the moment when a quiet disagreement inside palace walls allegedly transformed into something far more serious. If those claims were even partially true, then what unfolded next could explain why whispers of an internal struggle suddenly began dominating conversations far beyond Buckingham Palace. The story did not begin with shouting. It began with silence, and that silence carried far more weight than any public statement ever could. Before we go any further, if you've always believed that loyalty should come before palace politics, then this is your moment to make your voice count. Subscribe now, because every new revelation deserves to be followed from beginning to end, and together, we'll keep asking the questions that so many believe should never be ignored. As rumors continued to spread, one question refused to disappear. Why would Princess Anne, widely regarded as one of the monarchy's most disciplined and private figures, reportedly step into a dispute she had spent decades avoiding? Commentators offered different theories. Some believed she had simply grown concerned about the future of the institution. Others argued she was responding to growing speculation surrounding Prince William's position within the royal family. None of those accounts have been officially confirmed, yet the timing of the rumors, the reported private meetings, and the sudden shift in palace speculation created a mystery that refused to fade. What made the story even more compelling was that every alleged piece of the puzzle seemed to point in the same direction. Anonymous sources spoke of confidential discussions. Royal commentators debated reports of internal restructuring. Headlines questioned whether long-established traditions were quietly being reconsidered behind closed doors. Every new rumor seemed to create two more unanswered questions. If there was nothing unusual happening, why did the speculation continue to grow? And if there truly was disagreement inside the palace, who had finally decided enough was enough? Before this story goes any further, thousands of people have said they are tired of seeing questions inside the monarchy go unanswered. If you believe loyalty, honesty, and accountability should always come before palace politics, take 1 second to subscribe, leave a like, and share this video. It tells YouTube that more people should hear stories like this, and helps this channel continue following every twist that others might overlook.
Absolutely. What is very interesting was I heard from people who were very, very much involved 20-odd years ago, more than 20 years ago, in resurrecting Camilla. Their job was to take her from the mistress in 1996 and get her to be queen. And they were absolutely furious that they weren't invited to the coronation.
Hi viewers, before we continue, I want to ask you one simple question. If you were Prince William and discovered that people close to you might not be telling you the whole truth, would you forgive them? Type yes or no in the comments. I'm genuinely interested to see how many people would choose loyalty over silence. According to the rumors that would soon dominate royal discussions, Princess Anne had not rushed toward confrontation. She reportedly spent weeks observing subtle changes that most people would never notice. Invitations appeared to shift. Certain advisors were allegedly meeting more frequently behind closed doors. Conversations that once included senior members of the family were, according to speculation, becoming increasingly restricted. On their own, each detail looked ordinary. Together, they formed a pattern that some observers believed deserved closer attention. Prince William, according to several commentators, was said to have approached the growing speculation with far more restraint. Publicly, nothing changed. He continued carrying out engagements, greeting crowds, and representing the monarchy with the calm image people had come to expect. Those who followed the royal family closely noticed little difference. Yet behind that familiar public routine Rumors suggested trusted figures were quietly urging caution, while encouraging him not to react to stories that had yet to be substantiated.
My heir, William, now assumes the Scottish titles which have meant so much to me. He succeeds me as Duke of Cornwall and takes on the responsibilities for the Duchy of Cornwall, which I have undertaken for more than 5 decades. Today, I am proud to create him Prince of Wales.
Whether that advice was wise or dangerously optimistic soon became one of the central questions surrounding the unfolding narrative. Queen Camilla's name also began appearing more frequently in speculative reports, although none of the allegations were ever supported by official confirmation. Some royal commentators argued that increased influence naturally accompanies changes within any modern monarchy. Others believed that ordinary administrative decisions were being interpreted through the lens of palace rivalry. The absence of verified information created the perfect environment for competing narratives. Every newspaper, television panel, and online discussion seemed to offer a different explanation, leaving the public to separate rumor from reality. Princess Anne, however, was repeatedly described by those who have long observed the royal family as someone who rarely acted on emotion alone. That reputation became one of the biggest reasons these stories attracted so much attention. If someone known for patience and discipline was reportedly asking difficult questions, many wondered whether there was more beneath the surface than anyone outside the palace could see. The mystery deepened, not because of dramatic public statements, but because of the remarkable lack of them. Then another rumor emerged, one that immediately raised the stakes. According to palace speculation, Anne had allegedly requested access to information that very few people expected her to review personally. No official record confirmed such a request, and no palace representative acknowledged it publicly. Even so, the claim spread rapidly because it suggested she was no longer satisfied with second-hand explanations. She wanted to understand events for herself. That decision, if the reports reflected reality, marked a turning point. The story was no longer about gossip drifting through royal circles. It became a search for answers. Every reported meeting, every confidential conversation, every unexplained schedule change suddenly appeared connected to a larger picture that remained hidden from public view. Supporters of the monarchy hoped the rumors would eventually fade. Critics believed something significant was about to emerge. Neither side possessed enough evidence to settle the debate. What almost nobody anticipated was that the next alleged discovery would push the entire conversation into far more dangerous territory. According to speculation circulating among royal commentators, Princess Anne was about to come across something that would force her to decide whether protecting family unity mattered more than uncovering what she believed could be the truth. And if those reports were accurate, the decision she made next would change everything. The document hit the mahogany surface with a dull, heavy thud that made 2 senior solicitors flinch. Princess Anne did not sit down. She stood over the gathered advisors in a dimly lit office, deep within the palace administrative wing, her hands resting flat on the table as her eyes locked onto the lead legal counsel. For 3 long seconds, nobody in the room breathed. The papers sitting between them were not supposed to exist outside a locked archive in the basement offices. Yet there they were, stamped with private administrative seals and marked for restricted internal review. The quiet routine of palace administration had just vanished, replaced by the sharp, suffocating coldness of a confrontation nobody had prepared for. Outside the curtained windows, the rain washed over the courtyard, but inside, the temperature seemed to plunge. The senior advisor cleared his throat, attempting to reach for the file folder, only to freeze when Anne's sharp voice cut through the stillness. She did not raise her volume. She did not need to. She demanded to know who had authorized the alteration of the royal operational schedules for the upcoming calendar year, and why those adjustments systematically removed Prince William from key decision-making boards.
I think stuff to do with family overwhelms me quite a bit. You know, worry or stress around family side of things, that does overwhelm me quite a bit. But in terms of doing the job and things like that, I don't feel too overwhelmed by that. Not now, anyway.
The advisor attempted to offer a rehearsed response about routine institutional updates and long-term modernization planning, but the explanation died in his throat. Anne had already read every page. She knew the language of palace bureaucracy better than anyone in that room, and she recognized a deliberate maneuver when she saw one. For weeks, subtle shifts had been occurring behind closed doors, masked as harmless administrative reorganization. Yet as the legal team shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, the true scale of what was happening began to take shape. This was not a simple misunderstanding over calendars or ceremonial duties. It was a methodical attempt to alter the internal chain of command without exciting public suspicion. Anne remained standing, her gaze sweeping across the faces of men who had served the monarchy for decades, watching as their polite expressions crumbled into nervous glances. They warned her that pushing further would create an unmanageable crisis. They urged her to let the matter rest, cautioning that escalating an internal administrative query could trigger a public scandal that would tear the household apart. They spoke of discretion, of family unity, and of the fragile state of public perception. Anne listened to their warnings without moving a single muscle. When they finished speaking, the silence returned, heavier and more dangerous than before. She informed them that discretion was one thing, but allowing the future heir to be quietly stripped of his constitutional oversight was something entirely different. The legal advisors exchanged terrified looks, realizing that the usual appeals to tradition and quiet consensus were failing. Anne was not asking for their permission to investigate. She was informing them that the investigation had already begun, and she was not going to stop until every signature on those documents was accounted for. If you are watching this right now, and you know in your heart that standing up for what is right matters more than keeping comfortable secrets, you need to hit that subscribe button immediately. Staying silent when a wrong is being committed only helps those who operate in the shadows. Subscribe now and join the millions of viewers who refuse to look away from the truth, because what Princess Anne uncovered next is something they tried desperately to keep hidden from you.
Do you know, chums, if you are the Prince of Wales' Royal Highness Prince William, I think it's perfectly acceptable to be incredibly annoyed, shall we say even fuming behind the scenes over this latest shambles. That, of course, his younger brother, but more so, and this is my opinion, more so his wife, the former cable TV actress.
While the advisors in that room tried to minimize the damage, Prince William was operating under a completely different set of assumptions. Miles away, carrying out his public obligations with the steady, measured discipline he had displayed his entire life, William remained initially unaware of the extent of the maneuver taking place behind his back. When quiet warnings had first reached his private office, he had dismissed them as typical palace friction. He believed in the institution. He trusted the process, and above all, he believed that those around his father were working in the interest of the crown. But Anne knew that trust, when misplaced, could become a catastrophic vulnerability. She knew she could not rely on vague assurances from household officials who served multiple competing interests. In the hours following that tense meeting, Anne quietly initiated a private verification process, bypassing standard household channels entirely. She brought in independent constitutional experts, individuals whose loyalty belonged solely to the crown as an institution rather than any individual faction within the palace walls. Working late into the night, away from the watchful eyes of senior staff, they began cross-referencing internal memos, financial allocations, and private correspondence that had circulated between key administrative offices over the preceding 6 months. What they found confirmed Anne's worst fears. The language in the documents had been crafted with extreme precision. On the surface, each proposal seemed like a progressive step toward modernizing royal operations, distributing workloads, and streamlining official duties. But when read together as a single unified strategy, the underlying intent was unmistakable. Every single policy recommendation served to narrow William's authority, restrict his access to briefing papers, and transfer key institutional oversight to committees dominated by newly appointed allies of Queen Camilla's inner circle. It was an elegant, invisible strategy designed to achieve maximum control without ever triggering a single dramatic headline. The pressure inside the palace reached an agonizing peak as news of Anne's private review began to leak to a handful of senior officials. Panicked telephone calls were made in the middle of the night. Whispers echoed through the long corridors as staff members tried to figure out how much Anne actually knew and who had provided her with the restricted files. The atmosphere became poisoned with paranoia. Old friendships between long-serving aides disintegrated as colleagues suspected one another of leaking information to Anne's team. Yet despite the intense pressure building around her, Princess Anne remained entirely unshakable. When a high-ranking palace official approached her in a private hallway, practically begging her to stop the independent review before it caused irreversible damage to the family dynamic, Anne did not even slow her pace. She looked the official directly in the eye and told him that those who had nothing to hide had nothing to fear from the truth. The official stood frozen as she walked away, realizing that the quiet, orderly control the administrative faction had maintained for months was completely breaking down. Anne was closing in on the source of the proposals, tracking the paper trail back through layers of official jargon and secretarial stamps. Every document analyzed brought her one step closer to proving that this was not accidental administrative drift, but a calculated push for power at the very top of the royal household. Then, at 3 o'clock in the morning inside a secured office, one of the independent legal experts placed a single, heavily annotated document into Anne's hands. As her eyes scanned the highlighted text and the handwritten notes in the margins, the blood ran cold in her veins. This was not just a recommendation paper. It was the master blueprint, and the single name written at the bottom of the final page changed the entire nature of the game forever. The heavy oak door slammed against the brass stop, rattling the antique glass in the cabinet across the private library. Princess Anne threw the blue ledger onto the center of the desk, where it slid across the polished mahogany and struck a sterling silver desk clock. 3 senior household directors jumped to their feet, their faces draining of color as they stared at the open page. Embedded in section 4 of the document was the clause they thought had been buried under 400 pages of legal jargon, a single paragraph that effectively stripped Prince William of his automatic oversight of the royal estates during any period of monarchical transition. There was no greeting, no hesitation, and no diplomatic preambles. Anne stood directly across from them, her hand pressed flat over the highlighted text, demanding to know who drafted the specific amendments that systematically erased the Prince of Wales from executive decision-making. The lead director stammered, offering a fractured excuse about modern administrative alignment and updated constitutional guidelines, but his voice faltered under her unwavering gaze. He tried to claim the document was merely a draft, a routine exercise in long-term structural planning designed to lighten the burden on the direct line of succession. Anne did not buy it. She pointed directly to the date stamp on the margin, which revealed the proposal had already been circulated to select members of the Privy Council, without William ever receiving a copy. The deliberate nature of the operation was laid bare on the page. It was a quiet operational coup, executed not through public decrees or dramatic declarations, but through the dry, dense language of internal committee protocols. Every sentence in that blue ledger had been engineered to look innocuous to an outsider, yet its practical effect was devastating. Under the proposed framework, control over key appointments, asset distributions, and official household budgets would shift away from the heir apparent and consolidate within an executive board dominated by figures loyal to Queen Camilla. The strategy relied entirely on secrecy and speed, banking on the assumption that no senior royal would bother reading through hundreds of pages of tedious administrative revisions. They had counted on tradition, fatigue, and the natural deference of royal staff to carry the plan across the finish line unnoticed. As the confrontation inside the library intensified, The human cost of this power grab became painfully obvious. King Charles was growing increasingly isolated within his own residence, surrounded by a tight circle of advisors who carefully filtered every piece of information that reached his desk. Private meetings were held at odd hours in remote wings of the estate, deliberately scheduled when Prince William was away on public duties. The king was told these structural updates were essential for modernizing the image of the crown, presented to him as harmless organizational cleanup meant to simplify his daily duties. He was being kept in the dark about the true impact on his eldest son, insulated by aides who assured him that everyone, including William, was on board with the modernization drive. When Princess Anne marched down the long corridor toward the private sitting rooms to address the officials head-on, she found herself blocked by locked doors and vague excuses from tight-lipped secretaries. Nobody would give her a straight answer. Every question was met with practiced deflection, every request for a meeting postponed under the guise of pressing state affairs. The palace machinery was actively working to protect the scheme, creating an impenetrable wall of bureaucracy designed to stall her investigation until the final signatures were secured. If you are watching this right now and you plan to scroll away without taking a stand, ask yourself what kind of person stays silent while a loyal family member gets betrayed behind closed doors. Hitting that subscribe button takes less than 2 seconds, but walking away means choosing to ignore the calculated deceit unraveling at the very top of the institution. Subscribe right now if you believe in honor over deception, because if you leave now, you are turning your back on the most dangerous secret this household has ever tried to hide. The deception cut deep because it weaponized the language of progress against the very stability of the crown. While public statements praised Prince William as the future of the monarchy, internal memos were quietly stripping him of the practical tools he would need to govern effectively. His authority over ancestral lands was being converted into a purely ceremonial role, leaving him dependent on committee approvals for basic operational decisions. The psychological pressure was immense, creating an atmosphere where trust was entirely destroyed and every staff member was viewed with deep suspicion. Anne refused to let the wall of silence stop her. She bypassed the official channels entirely, tracking down the junior clerks and legal secretaries who had physically typed the revisions into the system. Working late into the night from a makeshift workspace in her private quarters, she pieced together the exact timeline of how the proposals were drafted. She traced the initial concepts back through private emails, encrypted messaging threads, and off-the-record meetings held at private clubs in London, far away from palace record keepers. With every newly discovered document, the full scope of the scheme became darker and more alarming. This was not a minor disagreement over protocol or a temporary feud between rival officers. It was a calculated, multi-phased campaign to ensure that even when Prince William eventually ascended the throne, his power would be constrained by legal frameworks locked in place long before his reign ever began. The conspirators were attempting to rule from the shadows, securing their own influence for decades to come at the direct expense of the rightful heir. The tension reached a boiling point when a senior insider, terrified by the legal implications of what was unfolding, reached out to Anne in complete secrecy. The individual agreed to meet her in a secluded hallway near the archives, far from the security cameras and listening devices that monitored the main state apartments. Standing in the dark, speaking in hushed, trembling tones, the insider handed over a sealed envelope containing private correspondence that exposed the exact identity of the mastermind who had coordinated the entire effort from the very beginning. The recorded voice, coming through the speaker, was barely above a whisper, trembling with undeniable terror. Princess Anne stood motionless in the middle of her private study, watching the audio file waves move across the encrypted laptop screen. Beside her, Prince William stared at the desk, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the wood. The anonymous palace insider did not mince words. In 7 minutes of crystal-clear testimony, the whistleblower laid out the entire timeline, describing how draft documents were modified under the cover of night, how specific administrative directives were quietly rewritten, and how senior staff were threatened with immediate termination if they questioned the unusual flow of paperwork. The insider detailed how secret meetings were arranged outside standard operational logs, using private couriers to bypass the central mailroom entirely. Specific names were dropped, dates were cross-referenced, and the exact sequence of events was laid out with terrifying precision. Listening to the recording, William experienced a cold, sickening wave of realization. The subtle shifts in staff behavior, the strange delays in receiving routine intelligence packets, the sudden exclusion from high-level briefings, none of it had been an accident. Every single anomaly he had brushed aside over the past year had been part of a deliberate, coordinated effort to erode his authority before he ever reached the throne. The initial shock rapidly gave way to a quiet, burning anger. The emotional weight in the room was suffocating. For years, William had operated under the assumption that those working within the palace walls were bound by a shared oath of loyalty to the crown and its natural succession. To hear a trusted staff member break down on tape, detailing how pressure was applied from the highest offices to isolate him, shattered every remaining illusion. The betrayal was not coming from external critics or hostile press outlets. It was coming from inside the house, orchestrated by individuals who ate at the same tables and walked the same carpeted corridors. Outside, the media speculation had already reached a fever pitch. International news networks were broadcasting continuous updates, analyzing every minor schedule adjustment and offhand comment from palace representatives. Factions were actively forming among the staff. Longtime colleagues stopped speaking to one another in the hallways, terrified of being linked to the wrong side of an accelerating internal war. Whispers turned into open anxiety as employees weighed their career prospects against the impending fallout of an exposure that seemed increasingly inevitable. Anne watched her nephew closely, recognizing the exact moment his perspective fundamentally transformed. The restraint he had maintained for months vanished, replaced by the sharp, protective instincts of a leader who realized his future was actively being stolen. Anne began laying out the physical evidence alongside the audio testimony, matching the whistleblower's statements to the stolen administrative ledgers, the altered calendars, and the flagged financial transfers. The paper trail was complete, undeniable, and utterly devastating. If you are sitting there right now thinking this does not matter to you, then you are actively enabling the type of cowardice that destroys truth. Walking away from this moment means proving that you do not care when honest people are manipulated and betrayed behind closed doors. Press that subscribe button right now to demand accountability. Do not let those who plot in the dark win simply because you are too indifferent to hit a button and stand for what is right. With the insider's testimony fully corroborated by hard documentation, the narrative constructed by the administrative faction completely collapsed. The excuses about harmless modernization and simple organizational efficiency were exposed as deliberate fabrications. Every single document revision carried the distinct mark of a calculated power grab, designed to strip the direct heir of his rightful oversight and consolidate operational power within a self-serving executive core. The psychological toll on those involved was immense. William was forced to confront the harsh reality that his trust had been systematically weaponized against him. The sense of isolation grew heavier with each passing hour, as he realized just how deep the network of complicity extended through the palace hierarchy. Yet amidst the anger and shock, a new sense of resolve took hold. He was no longer playing defense, nor was he willing to allow diplomatic considerations to dictate his response to an active threat against his constitutional role. Anne knew that gathering the evidence was only half the battle. Presenting it in a way that forced immediate action without causing the total public collapse of the institution required absolute precision. She meticulously organized the dossier, ensuring that every claim made by the anonymous witness was backed by verified records, official timestamps, and unbroken chains of custody. There could be no room for plausible deniability, no loopholes for the perpetrators to crawl through when confronted with the truth. The room grew dead silent as the final track of the recording played to its conclusion. The whistleblower's last words hung in the air, a chilling warning that the masterminds of the scheme were preparing to finalize the legal transfers within days if no one intervened. William looked up from the desk, his eyes locking with Anne's. The time for quiet internal reviews and polite legal inquiries had officially run out. Anne closed the laptop, snapped her briefcase shut, and looked directly at the future king. She declared that she was done operating in the shadows, done playing by rules that their opponents had already discarded, and done managing this crisis behind closed doors. She was taking the dossier straight to the very top, ready to force a confrontation that would forever alter the balance of power within the British monarchy. The heavy double doors of the private stateroom slammed shut, echoing through the grand hall as security personnel took their positions outside. Princess Anne walked straight to the long conference table, tossed the black leather dossier into the center of the polished wood, and pulled out a chair without waiting for an invitation. Around the room, senior household officials, constitutional attorneys, and key advisors from Queen Camilla's inner circle stood completely frozen. Prince William stood right beside his aunt, his expression unreadable, while King Charles sat at the head of the table, caught squarely between competing loyalties and looking at the thick stack of evidence sitting before him. There were no formal greetings, no polite exchanges, and no diplomatic pauses. Anne laid out the physical documents, matching the time-stamped memos, directly to the audio recordings gathered over the previous weeks. She did not raise her voice, but every word hit the room like a physical blow. The legal advisors attempting to represent the administrative faction tried to interrupt, offering nervous excuses about routine modernizations and misunderstood policy drafts. Anne cut them off immediately, pointing directly to the hidden clauses that systematically stripped William of his statutory oversight and quiet control over key institutional assets. The tension inside the room was agonizing. As the evidence unfolded, the focus shifted rapidly away from the administrative papers themselves to the individuals who had authorized their creation. The narrative that this was merely harmless administrative planning disintegrated entirely under the weight of corroborated facts. It was a high-stakes confrontation where every participant realized that their position, their reputation, and their entire career within the palace hung in the balance. William watched in silence as those who had spent months executing the quiet scheme suddenly scrambled to shift the blame onto one another. Queen Camilla's camp faced relentless scrutiny as the legal team cross-examined the origins of the structural recommendations. The atmosphere turned suffocatingly cold as the true depth of the palace division became undeniable. King Charles looked at the detailed paper trail, realizing that decisions made in his name had been engineered to undermine his own heir. The sense of institutional betrayal reached its absolute peak. The palace was no longer just dealing with a private family disagreement, but a fundamental collapse of internal governance that threatened the stability of the crown itself. If you are thinking about closing this video right now, without subscribing, you are choosing to turn a blind eye to the blatant manipulation taking place at the highest levels of power. Leaving now means you are content, letting corrupt palace politics dictate history, without ever holding anyone accountable. Click that subscribe button right now, hit the notification bell, and share this video everywhere immediately, because if you stay passive, you allow the darkest secrets to remain buried forever. Yet just as the room seemed on the verge of total collapse, Princess Anne introduced the final piece of evidence from the dossier, turning the entire crisis on its head. The initial documents, as devastating as they appeared, were merely a smokescreen. The real objective of the scheme was not simply to reduce William's day-to-day authority over royal estates, but to establish an unprecedented legal framework that would permanently alter the line of succession oversight during any future regency. Anne revealed a confidential, unreleased draft that had been hidden inside a private vault in London, far beyond the reach of standard palace record keepers. The signature at the bottom of that secret agreement belonged to a figure nobody in that room had ever suspected. The sudden realization sent shockwaves through every faction present, instantly shifting the entire conflict from an internal administrative battle into a massive constitutional crisis. The question was no longer just about who created the documents, but who had secretly funded and directed the operation from the very start. The immediate standoff came to a sudden, chilling halt as the realization set in that the masterminds behind this operation were far closer to the crown than anyone dared to imagine. Prince William looked at the final signature, realizing that the real fight for the future of the monarchy was only just beginning. The ultimate balance of power within the royal family now hangs by a single thread, waiting for the truth to be fully exposed to the world. Do not dare to look away now, because in our very next episode, we reveal the exact name written on that secret vault document and air the shocking private phone call that was secretly recorded just hours after this confrontation ended. If you miss what comes next, you will miss the single most dangerous secret the British monarchy has ever tried to hide from the public. So make sure you are subscribed and ready for the explosive follow-up.